I'm trying to provide tonight is a macro view of where the industry is going. So I think that it's important to get the granularity and the actual product information of how you can interact with the modern grid as an individual. But what I'm going to be trying to share tonight is just conceptually this idea from a macro view, so just to give you an introduction. So I just wanted to get a sense for the room and for myself who's in the room. So I just want to ask if we can get an indication of who is in the solar industry or in the energy industry and who's not. So who is in the energy industry? If you can just raise your hands, please. Thank you. And then who's not in the industry, if you're just here to learn something and get a sense of the broader market. So we've got a 50-50 split, so just to get it, so you get a sense of who's around you. Thank you. So this really is trying to understand if we pitch ourselves forward into 2025, what the grid's going to look like. I think we spent a lot of time trying to really understand, what's going to happen in 6 months' time and a year's time, and we really kind of look out and try and appreciate where we're going to be. And I think Andrew's given some colour to where we're going to go with price, which is going to be the big driver around take-up. But the household, an excited household, as you can see, in 2025 is going to be very much around generating their own power from solar, an electric car, if not one, then two, and then battery storage. But let's try and understand then what impact that has on the bigger numbers, which is the consumption numbers. Andrew again will have more detail on this, but the 18 kilowatt hours seems to be an average, somewhere between 16 and 18 kilowatt hours is what the average Australian household consumes on a daily basis. And when you factor in the electric cars, and perhaps if you've got two, that are using 15 kilowatt hours a day on average across the week, so there'll be peak during the week and less the weekend, you very soon can get to a household that had 18 kilowatt hours a day, pitching forward to 50 kilowatt hours a day. And so that's going to change the framework of this migration across from traditional petrol and diesel getting us into transport and electricity. So what part of that pie, that 50 kilowatt hours, is going to be still very much an opportunity for the retailer when the prosumers will unpack is starting to generate energy, a lot of their own power, but then store it not only in the batteries but then use the electric car to play in that market. And all of a sudden you've got an engagement from the public point of view around energy that's very different. So we've got so if we can skip across the next. So what I wanted to kind of unpack really is this vision of the future is very much about the Internet of Things, and what Steve Case does in his book The Third Wave. This is published only recently, and what Steve's done is look at the internet in its first phase, which is here, which was just really about simple internet adoption. How do we get as many people as we can onto the internet, and they built it, and certainly they came. And then in the second phase of the internet was very much about the internet moving from the internet itself as we know it from a desktop onto mobile, and mobile becoming the next craze, and huge businesses as we know were built out of the second phase in the internet. If you could just go back, sorry, just to finish off. So in that last part of the third wave, you'll see that there aren't any companies there. And that's really what this exciting part of this disruption is it's wide open. And I think the opportunity, certainly around energy, is going to be critical to the development in this third phase. because energy is going to be far much a bigger part of our lives. It's also hugely data rich, and it has the connectivity opportunity, as Andrew unpacked, in taking that data and then doing something with it to evolve the industry. But therein lies the opportunity for the businesses of the future that will leverage the Internet of Things. So we've got an old centralized network versus this decentralized, democratized grid. And really this idea is the sun, this slide's kind of deliberate, is the sun setting on that old decentralized grid and the impact of it? Because certainly for somebody who has a big roof, can install 15 kilowatts of solar, charge the batteries, charge the car, and run their devices, that world is far more secure. But for the rest of the community who may live in apartments and not necessarily have that access and privilege of generating your own electricity, we've got a community that we still have to kind of participate. So that's important. And so what I think from our point of view is to understand, certainly in Australia, we've got this huge penetration of solar, and now batteries following in very quickly in behind. But that's the challenge, is to understand that this network is enormous, and it benefits us all, and it has to be sustained across the entire length and breadth of it. And so the interesting part of this, looking forward in 10 years, is how is this going to transform? How are we going to change the shape of a grid that services electricity across the vast networks of the NEM and the networks in Western Australia, to evolve into something that's more sustainable. And so it's out with the old. The complexity of the distribution from generation through to distribution is I think vital for us still to understand and appreciate. We sit in homes and we install solar on the grid, and you hear many clients, as I have over the years, say, well, I just want to disconnect from the grid. I want to go off grid and have enough solar and enough batteries to do it. What's it going to cost? Can you make it happen? I don't think we're there yet for the general public, but this is what's going to change, and you can see the complexity of a centralized power generation that then distributes the power across this network, and all the way back down into our homes and businesses. So a huge investment's gone out over 100 years of build out to get to this distribution generation centralized model that we're now trying to that is now in a state of disruption. So what is new? The opportunity now is to start to generate our own power where we need it, certainly in the domestic environment where the match is much easier. With 15 kilowatts on your roof in most of Australia, you can match or near match that 50 kilowatt hours you're going to need. So that's achievable. Solar modules, when I entered the industry, were 170 watts. People perhaps back of the class might remember when they were smaller than that, Kathleen. But certainly that was when I started selling solar modules. They're now, LG are going to have something in the market at 360, and their objective before the end of the year is 400. So we've got on a smaller footprint and much more powerful module. But so achieving 15 kilowatts is possible. And so what we're seeing then is a combination of solar farms in fringe of grid supporting the network where the power is needed rather than centralised and sending it all the way up with up to 30% of distribution losses. So huge value to add to the network there. and a combination of controls which sit in the middle, which Andrew's been speaking to, which make it all possible, and so that for me is a slide that represents the opportunity, but how do we get there, and that's the real challenge. We talked about the policy structure, and how that policy structure is evolving and still going through this change, and I think vital in terms of facilitating the opportunity that vision presents. So a little bit more detail on the prosumer. The Reposit Power, who are based down in Canberra, who you may have heard of, have a very clear idea of being able to aggregate the battery storage out there in the grid and let that battery storage then participate in the spot market and get the reward for it. And if the smarts behind the data and what Reposit are able to achieve, all of a sudden takes a home that traditionally was buying 100% of the energy from their retailer to as little as 5 and 10%, which is an enormous change. If your business model is getting, somebody's all of a sudden taking a large percent of it, up to 90% of it, you've got a real problem. I mean, it's going to change fundamentally how you do business. And so how do we go on that? How do retailers, or how does the rest of the network that sits behind them in the distribution and legacy centralized generation, how do they adapt to a market that's evolving at that extent? So, another provider is Tesla, looking at end-to-end, where the model is very similar. To harness, store, and power the home, and so you're all of a sudden your batteries that are used in a household environment have an enormous possible benefit back to the community and the network at large, but it's going to require the policy settings and the abilities for the existing incumbents to start to loosen their grip and hold on the market, and in doing so allow, I think, the prosumers and us as end users to participate in the upside of being involved in the network. So no longer just somebody at the end buying something, but in fact generating and getting the benefit from that investment you're maybe making in solar and batteries, by participating then in the market and having some of the upside. Now that upside might go from, you might sell a kilowatt hour out onto the grid and be paid somewhere between 5 and 7 cents from your retailer, but that market, as we've just experienced in the heat wave that we here on the eastern seaboard, goes from 5 cents per kilowatt hour all the way through to $13 per kilowatt hour. That's the full length and breadth of it. And so that change and opportunity, if that's aggregated out into the community, that can harness, provide the income for the investment to happen. But we're ways away because of the structure of the policy. So I just wanted to share with you Sonen's idea, which was launched in the last kind of week and a half, where they will do the same thing. They'll provide solar plus battery, and then facilitate this participation in the NEM, and with the idea of zeroing out your bill. So you've got an independent provider, battery provider, that's cutting out the retailer, cutting out that distribution network, that centralized model, and within the home providing the resources and the infrastructure that have become economic, because they can zero your bill out. Certainly there's an upfront investment. But if you look at that upfront investment and you put some low interest rates on it, you can very quickly get to something that's paid off and then zero bills for years to come. So interesting idea. So the overriding message here, this is still staying very macro, is to look at the change from, in my belief, that the electricity sector needs to approach, is to go from a traditional way of just selling energy to serving. Traditional market, the retailers always cop it as the bad guys, but they sit, the distributors sit behind them, and then the generators sit behind them in that three-legged approach, and that's what's at threat. I think that's really what needs to shift. So the question is how we do that. So the participation for the retail opportunity is to participate as the smaller aggregators are starting to, or hardware providers are starting to. A lot of the energy companies have the relationships. They hold, 3 million, I think, is AGL, 2.8 is Energy Australia. I'm not sure what Origin is off the top of my head, but similar kind of order of magnitude. And what they're standing to lose is the customer base who goes out on their own and adapts to what's in the open market. So active energy monitoring and management, and Andrew, this is kind of why I thought I might go first and lead directly into you, but we've gone the other way around. But that really is at the heart of, it's the data that's at the heart of this change and disruption, and where all the leverage will come, because it's the information that's going to drive the economics, and so data is going to be absolutely key. And the ability for each one of us to participate in the trading on the electricity markets, that's enormous. I think that we'll certainly have to see that evolution if we're going to be engaged. So I think the other big message is that we've seen a huge amount of energy efficiency that's come through the industry and dropped off household kilowatt hours, and that's kind of been an endowment trend. And there's going to be hockey stick growth as we bring electric vehicles into the mix, and that's where the true opportunity sits for the retailers of the future. So that's a kind of macro view of where I think the industry's going, and just to give you an insight to really, I think that the changes have to come from the retailers and the industry, and the opportunity is for them to either adapt or die, because there are true alternatives in the market now. That's it. Thank you.
Any questions for Grant? Such a presentation, no question.
What do you imagine the government has to do to facilitate some of this inevitability? At the moment, it's more fashionable to take a lump of coal into Parliament than to facilitate this activity.
Yes, and I think the policy framework is vital in the transition, but also what I think is more fundamental. It's not necessarily driven by government; it's driven by the industry itself. So I think that the big retailers have a responsibility to adapt, and they're starting to. I mean, the AGL has a new energy division, and they're looking at this very closely. It's not just that it's happening around them and they're oblivious to it. However, I think that the leadership needs to start there, and then filter back into what's going to make this sustainable into the future for us as a collective and a community. I think that the coal stunt just as what that illustrates is that's more about votes than about the practicality of running a successful grid that provides energy to us 24/7. So I think the big incumbents are where the opportunity sits, but also the counterpoint to that is that they have a business model that's predicated on the old system. So there's a paradigm shift that's required. What's happened in the European utilities, like E.ON and the other big German utility, is that within those utilities, they've been doing renewables for a long time, and they had under one roof a renewables division and then an existing coal generation division. And what they ended up having to do is split the company in half and separate them out on the stock exchange as two different companies, because internally the people within those businesses couldn't reconcile their view of the world. So the coal guys just saw it as the traditional generation, and they couldn't get their head around that there had to be this change. As did the renewables, said we have to decouple, we've got to move on. And they couldn't reconcile it. So it was simpler just to take these billion-dollar businesses and split them down the middle and send them in different ways. And we've seen that in Europe, and we've seen it in the US as well.
What do you see the large energy retailers doing to counter this disruption?
Well, I've been in the industry, as I said, 10 years, and what I've seen is that they have this on-off switch where they participate in the market for a while, and then somebody comes in and closes the whole department down. So they build up these big teams of people selling solar, and they'll be charged with going out and selling it in the market and competing in an aggressive market to install solar. Then somebody says, no, that's no longer what we want to do, and so they'll close down these big departments, and then they'll lie fallow for years until somebody else comes along and says, right, why aren't we in this market? And then they'll generate a new team. Now they've just started redeploying big teams, and New Energy at AGL is a good example. So I think what's required internally is this idea of seeing seeing what energy will become in the future, and seeing how they can, as I say, not just sell energy, but provide a service. So Andrew's talked about the data and what comes out of that. The opportunity is to take that information, provide it back customized to an individual householder, and show them how, and demonstrate to them how they can save money, save electricity, and ultimately make the transition to a prosumer. So once you put a service hat on, it becomes very different than to customers by and large that for the last 100 years have been ignored and just sent bills, and they've been at the end of a long line of processes. And now the NRG in the US is very interesting, because David Crane, the ex-CEO, tried to take a huge, the biggest amount of retail customers in the US market, and they took a very aggressive strategy out to market of renewables. Internally, unfortunately, their share price was absolutely hammered on the stock exchange, and he was exited. So there is this idea about, in the transition, it's kind of more broad than what's going on within the businesses themselves. It's how they perform on the stock exchange influences, quarterly results, and then how do they match that with a consumer that's going elsewhere, a prosumer who wants to participate, and the costs trajectory that Andrew illustrated so well is why it's going to happen.
So you're optimistic that they're going to embrace or be forced by market arrangements to facilitate these things? I mean, what's your view that they're simply not going to increase the connect fee as a percentage of the total bill, and they're going to move to block, they're going to block price just to.
So I couldn't agree with you more. There is a way of a negative approach, which is to do as Telstra once did, to take a $10 connection fee and make it $40. They could just do it. The connection fee currently is 70 cents a day, 80 cents a day. They could make it $5, and that's what it is. They can also say, as I think the water industry, you can't disconnect. You physically have to pay regardless if you're connected or not. If you're in the street, I mean, these mad ideas of not being able to disconnect are also prevalent. What I do think, though, is that the gentailers, the three big gentailers, have the best opportunity because they own the customer, and so it's the opportunity's there for the taking. It's just a question of whether they will or not, and I don't know the answer to that. But I do see that they're on the spot to maximise the opportunity and participate if they can evolve their thinking outside of selling and into service. But until they do that, that others will come along and gobble up their opportunity.
So, just refining that question a little bit then, what gives you some optimism that there may be market forces causing them not to take a negative view in maintaining their grip on the market?
So there were two negatives in there. You're saying what?
Well, what gives you optimism?
Yes.
That there are market factors.
Yes.
In other words, what are those market factors that you can foresee that might give you optimism that they won't go towards that negative?
Well, I think it sits in the data. So what I strongly believe is that the data gives us a granular visibility. I'll give you an example. There's a new retailer out in the market called Mojo Power, and what Mojo Power do is they charge you a monthly subscription fee, and then they pass through all the kilowatt hours at wholesale. So they don't make any profit on the kilowatt hours or the units sold to you. They just have their subscription fee. And all of a sudden, that relationship of you buying less is decoupled. If you buy less, it doesn't impact their revenue stream. They make $500 odd per year per customer. So they just need to get lots and lots of customers paying the subscription fee. And then what happens in between is irrelevant. But what's important about Mojo is because they don't care about the units, they're happy to tell you about them. So you can get hourly data on a $45 plan. You can get hourly data on what's being consumed and generated in your house, and you can load shift. So you can see, well, my solar is now performing on this, perfectly during the day, the normal curve. But I'm missing out on the 2 o'clock part of it. I should run my pool pump all the way from, instead of running from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., I'll run it from 11 to 6, and I'll get that saving. And so that I think is a data play. It's about giving a user-friendly interface to understand how we're using the power in a palatable way, and that I think is the true opportunity. But it's having the confidence in the customer, if you like, and treating them with respect and treating them to serve them rather than sell them. And so once you start serving, you try to look at those opportunities through a very different prism. I don't think we're there yet, but that's a good example. Sorry, at the back.
Grant, I'm actually going to interrupt you. Sorry, chaps. I just want to, in the means of time,
yes.
I'm going to pause an end there.
Okay.
Thank you so much. It was terrific.